Brock Purdy, Brady, is there's no chance of Cinderella. This isn't like a Cinderella story, right? The last 2 weeks, I know that like the SI Fan Nation or whatever that does the 49ers, like the guy suggested if Brock Purdy didn't play well this week, he might get benched for Sam Darnold, which is a touch ridiculous, right?
I mean, I don't see it. Look, a couple bad games. By the way, you want to get up against the Browns, who are arguably one of the best defenses, if not the best, in the NFL. Okay, you lost Christian McCaffrey for portion of that game. Trent Williams, Debo, we know that. This past week, I mean, I'd have more concerns. I came away from watching that what was it, Sunday night game? I came away
Monday night,
excuse me. More looking at it saying like, dude, the 49ers give up like 400 yards on defense. Like, that was what was more surprising to me. Like, in the end, if you're upset about the interceptions, like, what do you want Brock to do, right? I don't care what quarterback you're talking about. Like, at the end of the game, do you not want him trying to throw balls in the tight windows? He's got to throw the football to get his team back into it. So the first one didn't look great. The last one was kind of out of desperation. You got to make that throw, unfortunately, when you're in that position. So it is what it is. But I think he's fine. I think he will be fine. It's just, look, he's played with a lot of dynamic pieces around him. Some that's been taken away. The Viking scheme's tough to go up against. Brian Flores gives you a lot of different looks. You shouldn't lose faith. I think he'll be fine. He's still a young player in this league, too, growing into the quarterback that he's going to be. So I wasn't overly concerned with it, at least from the Brock Purdy standpoint of it. I just think we were bound to see him have an off day at some point, and you've probably seen that the past couple of weeks. I mean, he's been on fire ever since he started starting for the 49ers.
And dudes, I heard Joe Buck. So two comments about this game interested me. One, Joe Buck said that Kyle Shanahan was like really like legitimately upset that this is the game Deebo Samuel had to miss, because against that Brian Flores defense, Deebo's a guy where you can kind of beat the blitz by getting the ball in the short yardage stuff and letting him take off. And then Harrison Smith, Notre Dame guy, Brady, was on the Pat McAfee show, and I heard him talking and just basically saying that like it's taken them a few weeks kind of to like they feel like they're kind of getting Brian Flores' defense more now than they had been in the early part of the season. That like a lot of the language, a lot of the concepts that they were doing were not like, I mean, Harrison Smith's been around the block, and like he was like some of this stuff was really foreign to me. It's stuff I wasn't used to doing. Like as a defender, is that I think that probably flies under the radar. You switch schemes, so you go from Ed Donatel to Brian Flores. Like how difficult is that to pick up? And is that like that's a real thing, right?
Yeah. If you think about it, it's going to take a little time to get the nuances and terminology down when you're in a new defense, especially a guy like Brian Flores, who routinely likes to blitz, right? So he likes to give you different looks. He'll blitz and go man, blitz and go zone. So like you said, even Harrison Smith, who's been around the block for a long time, right? He's had different defensive coordinators. He said it took him a while to get the terminology and get this defense down. So I think you're starting to see the last few weeks. We knew that this Vikings defense was the Achilles heel last year, right? They were awful in pass defense. But a guy that, I want to circle, Cam Bynum. I mean, he had a ridiculous game against the 49ers on Sunday night. I mean, those two interceptions, to Brady's point, right? Brock Purdy, like, you're happy when he throws in anticipation of those tight windows, but when somebody makes a play on the ball, you're upset with him. So, like, what is Brock Purdy supposed to do in those situations? I think Cam Bynum just made two really great plays, and then he also forced a fumble earlier in the game versus Christian McCaffrey to get that fumble recovery. So they had a great game plan, right? They weren't going to let Christian McCaffrey beat them running the ball. Now, he did beat them on a screen for an explosive touchdown, but they were going to force Brock Purdy without Deebo Samuel, without Trent Williams at left tackle, to go down and have methodical drives and score at the end of those drives. But I'm like, Brady, we could talk about, the Vikings game plan against the 49ers offense. I think the biggest surprise was how the Vikings, without their number one receiver, right, with Jordan Addison, who essentially has become their number two, out for at least most of the third quarter and fourth quarter, Kirk Cousins put up almost 400 yards throwing the ball against them. I don't think anybody saw that happening. So, I mean, Brady, your Vikings pick for the division, you turn back and look, I think they're only a game and a half behind, the Detroit Lions now. So everybody's willing to say that this team should sell. They should sell everybody. Everybody should get traded. Kirk Cousins, JJ, Danielle Hunter, sell everybody. Now, if you look at it, especially in the NFC, with it being a down year, the Vikings, and if you look at I think their next 4 games are, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they play the Chicago Bears. I believe they play the Denver Broncos. They play the Atlanta Falcons.
Or did they already play the Panthers?
They'll play
Green
Panthers.
Bay and New Orleans. They got Atlanta again. I think they have Atlanta coming up, right?
And the point is, they can get back into it. They haven't played many divisional games, so it's going to be big in that respect. This week's going to be huge in that respect, going to Green Bay. I want to go back to the difficulty when you talk about Harrison Smith and learning a new defense, especially for a safety position, because they do ask him to do a lot of different things, right? Whether it's playing deep half, deep middle, and coverage down in the box as more of a force defender, or even blitzing. The game I got to call, he ended up having game-sealing sacks as a blitzer, as a safety. So it's a large departure from what they were asked to do last year under Ed Donatel, in the sense of how they're playing more of that shell coverage and not quite as aggressive with the way they were presenting some of those pressures. One of the things that you look at that I love is kind of like diving deep in the X's and O's, is how they go about doing it with those all-up looks, right? That's what the offense calls it when you get a defense that's got the 4 down linemen, but then you got 2 guys in the A gap, a guy out on the edge, and you're trying to decipher like who's coming, who's not, because we've got to figure out how we're using our 5 offensive linemen and a tight end and a running back in protection, or either or of those guys, depending on who's in protection. And one of the things that they'll do based on that, and it takes a while to get comfortable with it, is you've got your quarterbacks playing off, but they've got eyes. They can feel the obviously the receiver, but they can also look through to the quarterback. And what they're doing is they're going to look to see which way the line slides, because whichever way the line slides, if it's sliding away from them, they know they're going to get the free runner from that side. And that free run is going to force the football out faster to their side. Most offenses coach their quarterbacks to throw into pressure. So if you're a quarterback back there and you're looking at all these guys, you don't know which one's coming. If you got a 6-man protection, it looks like there might be 7 coming. You're going to basically say, I'm putting the line this way. I've got these guys on these guys. And if there's a free defender, it's going to be that guy. And if that guy comes, I have my quick answer to that side of the field. That's typically how it's played. And what's hard is the way Brian Flores and the Vikings defense mixes up their looks, mixes up their pressures. It makes it hard to decipher, because they're not just going to allow you to get a beat on it every single time you come out on 3rd down or must-pass situations. And so because of that, it's allowed them to be more opportunistic in the way they've gone about getting turnovers, getting pressure, and also confusing quarterbacks after the snap of the football, and then trying to jump different routes. So anytime you can slow up a quarterback's thought process after the snap of the football, that's what allows a defense, to me, to be most effective.
Conversely, too, like just to, and I guess ironically, it was Cousins had one where, I think it was Cousins, right? He shifted the protection to the right, and then like they blitzed from the left side. He's like, ah! And you could hear him scream. He's just like, and he just whips it out. I think it was CJ Hawkins there.
Yeah,
it was like,
you get full time. And really, when you've got those 2 guys in the A gap, and Leger knows this, I mean, with both backers, really what they're going to do is they're going to see which way the center drops and sets. And whichever way he sets,
correct,
the linebacker to that side is going to drop. The other guy's going to run through the A gap, right? And it's one of the reasons why, like, what you started to evolve and doing as an offensive line in your protection scheme was, you'd say, like, I don't care who's in the A gaps. Like, the offensive line is going to have one of those guys. The back has the other, right? We don't want our back being on an edge defender or a bigger guy than him. We want big on big. Right. So as long as the quarterback's in shotgun, that running back has time to get up there and end up blocking that linebacker, or really whichever one would end up coming through in that case. The offensive line kind of sets with a little more depth, and then they're able to slide to whichever side. You kind of jelly set, and hopefully they can pass off some of those different rushes. The problem is when you start incorporating games, twists, stunts, the way they slant, ETs, T's, that's what gets complicated, because then you've got to get guys who have enough time to work together to pass all those games off. Fortunately, for example, with an offensive line like the Vikings that had struggled earlier this year, they put Dalton Reisner at left guard, Ezra Cleveland out, and they don't give up a sack. They actually handle a lot of the stunts and games from San Francisco pretty darn well. I know we're talking about the other side of the ball here, but that's just an example of that.
No, I mean, not a lot of
I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up, Brady, because we actually had the conversation last week talking about offensive line play and how it hasn't been as good. And I thought this was a underlying signing, Dalton Reisner. They got him in, well, not in the middle of the season, but it was about 3 or 4 games into the season. I think he's really fortified that inside. Ed Ingram has played well. Something that hasn't been talked about enough, I think the Vikings have 2 of the best tackles in all of football. We talk about Brian O'Neill being a really good offensive tackle, and then Christian Darrisaw is going to be a superstar in the future. So for them to go up against that gauntlet that is the 49ers and not give up a sack, guys, like, and it wasn't like Kirk Cousins wasn't dropping back and passing. It was almost like 7-on-7 out there, the way he was playing quarterback. So he dropped back a lot in that game. For him not to, he said he felt the rush, but watching the game, Brady, it didn't seem like he felt the rush, or he was comfortable back there. You got to give a kudos to that offensive line, especially that interior with Javon Hargrave, the way he's played throughout the season. I think Dalton Reisner has really fortified the interior of the interior three of that offensive line.
Yeah, remember he came from Denver, where he was with the offensive line coach. They're now in Minnesota, Chris Cooper, who was with Mike Munchak. So a lot of familiarity with what they're asking them to do from a protection and run blocking standpoint.
And Mike Munchak, just one of those guys that, I mean, it's like him and Brian Callahan, where it's like you get like the tutelage of either of those two guys, you're just going to have an offensive line that overperforms. PFF at PFF Zoltan points out this is after this game. There's only one offensive lineman in the entire NFL who's played more than 100 pass plays and has yet to allow a single pressure. And that offensive lineman is who's that? Is that NC State's own Garrett Bradbury? That's right, former 3-star tight end.
And then they missed him when Austin Schloman was in. It was a little bit different. They missed him. Schloman did a decent job, but Bradbury's the better player. Clearly, there's a reason why when he's back, they've been better.
Definitely.
Yep, and I wrote about this actually too after they beat the Bears last week. I was like, and to be perfectly frank, I was like stretching for topics out of the 1:00 games and like couldn't really think of one as my secondary topic. And I went with maybe the Vikings aren't dead yet. And I was like, I don't know if I really believe this, but you beat the Niners, and Aaron Rodgers talked about this on the McAfee show too. Is like because he was asked about Jordan Love and he sort of deflected a little bit and by saying. He's like, what do you think about the Packers? He didn't want to say, I don't think he wanted to talk about Jordan Love. But he's like, look at the Vikings. This is a week-to-week league. A week ago, it's like, yeah, they beat the Bears, but it's time to sell everybody. Trade Kirk Cousins. Like, should they trade Justin Jefferson? I floated that on this podcast. Like, not that seriously, but it was like, and then now it's like, whoa, the Vikings just beat the Niners. They're now 3-4. They are at the Packers, at the Falcons, versus the Saints, at the Broncos, and versus the Bears before their Week 13 bye. They won't be more than a 3-point dog, probably more than a 1-point dog in any of those games, and they're likely to be favored. Then you get Justin Jefferson back, and the defense is starting to play well. Like, the Vikings look like they could be a potential playoff team, and it's just a reminder of like how quickly things move in the NFL.
It's crazy, right? Because what was the record? 4-3 now, if I'm not mistaken.
3-4. Who is Minnesota's 3-4?
3-4.
Yep.
And
but
last year,
honestly, like you said.
Well, hold on. So last year they were 9-0 in one-score games.
11-0.
Correct.
11-0. Excuse me.
Yeah.
They're right now 3-4 because they've played all one-score games.
Every single game.
Every single game has been a one-score game.
Fast forward to the 2-minute warning, and then let Kirk Cousins either drive down and score or not.
That's been their season. Like,
I think we talked about that. Yeah. We talked about that last week, right? Because we were saying that's not sustainable. Like when they did it last year, I was like, there's no way you can do that in back-to-back years. And we see this year, they've won, 3 out of the 7 games they've been in one-score games. And if you look at the next 5 games, like you said, Will, honestly, they're going to either be favored or they're going to be within 3 points on the spread. So they literally could win all 5, or they could go 4-1 over the next 5. And then we're talking about, they play Detroit late twice in the year. We're talking about those two games being pivotal for whoever wins the division.